Hello, friends. If you're curious about the movie Meg 2, The Trench 2023, you're in the perfect place. Don't forget to give this video a quick like, it really helps us out. And if you're new here, hit subscribe to stay updated on all the latest movie deep dives. Let's jump right in. Beneath the shimmering surface of the ocean lies a darkness deeper than nightmares. A silence so profound that even the bravest explorers hesitate to disturb it. In this continuation of an epic battle between humankind and nature's most ancient monsters, the stakes are higher, the creatures are deadlier, and survival demands more than strength, it demands audacity. When man decides once again to dip into the forbidden depths, he unleashes horrors that the sea had long kept hidden, and the thin line between scientific discovery and sheer survival is ripped apart by jaws that know no mercy. The story plunges us right back into a world where the ocean is both a breathtaking wonder and an endless terror. Jonas Taylor, the ever-resilient deep-sea diver and survivalist, returns to the front lines, but this time, he's not just battling ancient predators. He's racing against a ticking clock, corporate greed, and a growing sense that humanity has ventured too far into the unknown. There's a feeling from the very beginning that this isn't just about facing the beasts below. It's about facing the consequences of man's relentless thirst for more. Everything kicks off with a daring expedition into the previously unreachable parts of the Mariana Trench, an abyss so deep that sunlight hasn't kissed its floor for millions of years. Armed with cutting-edge technology and a team of the brightest, and perhaps the most reckless, scientists, the mission starts with hope. They aim to uncover new species, map untouched territories, and bring back knowledge that could change the course of marine science forever. But in their ambition, they breach a natural barrier, awakening creatures that should have remained hidden in the dark. The first glimpses of the deep are mesmerizing, otherworldly bioluminescence, colossal, slow-moving shadows that suggest the scale of life beneath. It's beautiful. It's mesmerizing. And it's deadly. What begins as a scientific marvel quickly spirals into a desperate fight for survival when ancient predators, massive and merciless, find their way into waters where humans thought they ruled supreme. Among these monsters is the Titan, larger and more fearsome than anything Jonas and his team have ever encountered. But the real horror unfolds when it becomes clear that the prehistoric sharks are not the only threats lurking in the dark. Other creatures, ancient, mutated, and aggressively territorial, rise from the black waters, bringing chaos to every inch of ocean they touch. Back on the surface, things only worsen. Greedy corporate interests, seeing dollar signs instead of danger, rush to exploit the discovery. Private militias, rogue scientists, and black market traders all collide in a perfect storm of human greed and environmental catastrophe. The ocean's fury is unleashed not just through its monsters, but through the arrogance and short-sightedness of those who think they can tame it. Jonas, weathered but unbroken, becomes the reluctant leader once more. There's a heavy weight on his shoulders this time, a deeper weariness that seeps into his every move. He's no longer fighting just to survive. He's fighting to prevent a global catastrophe that could redefine humanity's place at the top of the food chain. Alongside him are familiar faces and new allies, each bringing their own strengths and weaknesses to a battle that seems impossible to win. There are moments of breathtaking awe, a helicopter struggling against the wind as a creature breaches the waves beneath it, a deep-sea chase through narrow underwater canyons where every turn could spell death, and a desperate battle against time as a colossal predator turns a beach into a bloody playground. But beyond the action, there's a gnawing tension that runs through every scene, a question that lingers in the salt-choked air. What happens when humanity is no longer the apex predator? The story cleverly weaves together human conflict with primal terror. Corporate betrayal and personal grudges explode into violence just as vicious and bloody as the creatures prowling the deep. At every turn, Jonas is forced to question not only who he can trust but whether survival is even worth it when the world above and below seems hell-bent on tearing itself apart. One of the key elements that elevates this tale is the terrifying unpredictability of the ocean itself. The trench isn't a silent backdrop. It's alive, a vast, shifting labyrinth of currents, crushing pressures, and hidden dangers. Even when the monsters aren't visible, the sea remains an ever-present, looming threat. Visibility drops. Sonar readings falter. Communications fail. In the deep, nothing behaves the way it should, and every plan becomes a desperate improvisation. Midway through the story, a devastating twist shatters any illusions of control the characters thought they had. A secret facility, hidden on the ocean floor, reveals itself, not as a beacon of scientific hope, but as a Pandora's box of horrors unleashed. Genetic experiments, hybrid creatures, and reckless attempts to weaponize the ocean's beasts come to light, and the battle lines blur between human monsters and those born from the depths. As the tension crescendos, Jonas and his team must launch one final, desperate assault on both the creatures and the corrupt forces manipulating them. The climax delivers jaw-dropping sequences of carnage and courage, a high-speed chase across a sinking oil rig, a close-quarters battle inside a flooding research station, and a final confrontation with a creature so massive and ancient that it seems less like an animal and more like a living, breathing piece of the Earth's oldest nightmares. But the true brilliance lies not just in the spectacle, but in the lingering sense of wonder and dread. Even after the final battle is fought, even after the waters grow still and the survivors limp back to land, one truth remains. The ocean is bigger, older, and fiercer than anything mankind can imagine. And it will never be tamed. In the quiet aftermath, Jonas gazes out over the endless blue horizon. There's no victory speech. No promises that the horror is over. Only the silent acknowledgement that survival is temporary, and that some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed again. This latest chapter doesn't just retread old waters. It dives deeper, goes darker, and forces its characters, and its audience, to confront the terrifying beauty of a world we barely understand. The monstrous size of the creatures is matched only by the magnitude of human greed and folly, and somewhere in the churn of blood and salt water, a lesson is scrawled in crimson against the deep. Sometimes, the most dangerous thing we can do is think we are in control. If you thought you knew what lurked beneath the waves, think again. There are bigger things waiting in the dark. Hungrier things. And next time, we might not be so lucky. It begins in the hush before the chaos, deep under the surface of a restless sea where sunlight dares not tread. The world above moves on, blissfully unaware, but far below, in the frozen blackness of the trench, ancient things stir. It's there that a new expedition, ambitious and reckless, sets its course. He's not diving into the trench for fame or fortune. For him, it's survival. Redemption. A chance to confront the abyss on his own terms, one last time. His presence steadies the team, though even he can feel the ancient, bone-deep wrongness radiating from the dark beneath them. The descent is nothing short of breathtaking, a plunge through layers of increasing pressure into a realm where familiar rules no longer apply. The team watches, transfixed, as the seabed yawns open before them, revealing a hidden world teeming with bioluminescent life forms that pulse and shimmer like a living constellation. For a moment, it seems like discovery has triumphed over fear. But that illusion shatters the moment they breach the thermocline, a thin, misty barrier that has, until now, protected the upper world from what lies beneath. Alarms wail, sensors flicker and die, and for a heartbeat, the deep falls silent. Then the darkness comes alive, rushing in with jaws wide enough to swallow hope itself. It is a brutal ambush. From the abyss rises a creature that dwarfs even the nightmares of the previous encounters, a megalodon larger, faster, and more savage than any before. It is not alone. Flanking it are smaller predators, swift and vicious, adapted perfectly to their primeval world. What was meant to be an exploration becomes a massacre. Submarines are torn apart like paper. Divers vanish in flashes of red. The ocean, once mesmerizing, turns into a graveyard. Amid the carnage, Jonas rallies the survivors, shepherding them into the fractured remains of a mobile research platform. Desperation claws at their nerves as they realize the truth. They didn't just wake one creature. They opened a door. And from that door, nightmares are spilling upward. The immediate goal is simple: escape. But every route to the surface is a gauntlet of predators, currents, and crumbling machinery. The team's communications are severed. Their navigation systems are scrambled. Every second they linger, they fall deeper into the monster's territory. Tension coils tighter with every move. Supplies run low. Equipment fails. The walls of their temporary shelter groan under unseen pressures. Jonas, who has seen too much death to be paralyzed by fear, takes the lead in devising a daring plan, a high-risk dash through the undersea canyons to reach a secondary platform equipped with an emergency beacon. If they can activate it, perhaps, just perhaps, they can summon help before they're dragged into the abyss for good. It's a plan born of necessity, not hope. The journey across the canyon is a descent into pure terror. Massive shadows circle in the gloom beyond their lights. Strange, prehistoric creatures dart in and out of view, some merely curious, others clearly sizing up the struggling humans as prey. The team moves slowly, painfully aware that speed will draw attention, but so will hesitation. At every turn, they are tested. An enormous gulper eel, jaws unhinging impossibly wide, sweeps through their ranks. A pod of armored, snapping predators, neither fully fish nor reptile, forces them to take a perilous detour through a crumbling underwater gorge where ancient bones lie in jagged piles. Each encounter whittles their numbers down, each death another wound stitched into the survivors' hearts. And amidst it all, the colossal Meg hunts them. It moves with terrifying patience, as if toying with its prey, occasionally breaching the surface far above to unleash chaos among unwitting ships and coastal towns. But it always returns, drawn by the scent of blood, the electric panic bleeding into the water. Meanwhile, the story on the surface grows darker. Unknown to the team below, a private corporation, disguised as a scientific partner, has its own designs on the creatures stirring in the trench. Representatives of the corporation, watching the unfolding horror from afar, make a chilling decision. Containment is no longer the goal. Capture and control are. They deploy mercenaries and high-tech weaponry, arrogantly believing they can bend ancient forces to their will. It is this greed that will doom them all. As Jonas and his dwindling group finally reach the secondary platform, battered and traumatized, they discover the beacon sabotaged, smashed deliberately to prevent any warning reaching the world above. It's a betrayal that cuts deeper than any wound inflicted by the monsters. Someone among them was working for the corporation. Trust fractures. Accusations fly. In the cold, pressure-crushed silence of the deep, the human monsters reveal themselves. With no rescue coming, Jonas hatches a desperate, reckless plan: lure the megalodon into a geothermal vent system, unstable, volatile, capable of obliterating anything foolish enough to swim too close. It's a suicide mission, but in Jonas's eyes, it's the only way to stop the creatures from reaching the surface in force. But even as they set their trap, another twist waits. For the creatures are adapting, learning. The Meg is no mindless brute. It's a predator shaped by millions of years of perfect evolution. It anticipates, counters, and strikes with a cunning that chills the blood. The hunters realize too late that they are no longer the ones dictating the terms of survival. What began as a mission of discovery has become a war for survival against an ancient enemy reborn into a world it was never meant to see again. And as Jonas readies himself for a final confrontation beneath the crushing weight of the sea, he knows the battle will not be won with strength alone. It will take cunning, sacrifice, and a willingness to descend into darkness without any guarantee of light on the other side. The trench yawns beneath them, vast and patient, waiting to see who will rise, and who will be swallowed whole. The ocean seemed endless, an infinite black mirror stretching in every direction as the battered survivors drifted in their crippled vessel, clinging to the slimmest thread of hope. Blood in the water drew the beasts closer, their ancient instincts sharper now, their patience thinning. Jonas Taylor tightened his grip on the cracked rail, feeling the hum of something greater than terror thrum through the deep. There was no rescue coming. No last-minute salvation. Only them, the monsters, and the abyss yawning open below. Their plan, fragile as it was, began to unravel the moment it was set in motion. The idea had been simple: use the geothermal vents to incinerate the megalodon and any other predators that threatened the surface. But nature, indifferent to human schemes, had other ideas. Shifting tectonic plates triggered a seismic event, and suddenly the landscape of the trench itself began to collapse. Fissures cracked open, belching superheated plumes into the water, and new predators, sleeker, deadlier than anything catalogued before, erupted from the hidden crevices. Jonas knew immediately they had lost the advantage. The beasts were not only ancient, they were smart. They moved in coordinated packs now, herding the survivors toward dead ends, toward blind alleys of crushing pressure and toxic heat. Every movement had to be recalculated, every breath taken in desperate silence, every heartbeat a drumbeat against the walls of their shrinking hope. Desperation bred dangerous choices. It was within this tightening noose that Jonas made a decision: divide the group. He would act as bait, drawing the megalodon and its swarm away from the others long enough for them to make it back to the surface. Sacrifice, that old companion of every hero who knows the sea's true hunger, weighed heavy on his mind. But he did not hesitate. He took the smallest submersible, barely seaworthy, cobbled together from wreckage and sheer will, and plunged it deeper into the cracks of the trench, where the geothermal chaos burned hottest and survival became a matter of moments, not minutes. Above, chaos unfurled in grotesque beauty. The corporation's mercenaries, greedy and foolish, unleashed their final gambit, experimental sonic weapons designed to disorient the creatures. It worked, for a moment. Screams reverberated through the water, painful even to human ears. But the ocean does not forgive tampering. The vibrations enraged the beasts, triggering a frenzy so violent it tore ships apart like driftwood. Out of the smoke and broken bodies, the megalodon rose, grander and more grotesque than ever, its body marked by battle scars from 1,000 forgotten wars. Its massive eyes locked onto the chaos above, sensing weakness, sensing prey. No longer content with ruling the trench, it ascended toward the vulnerable surface world. And not alone. Following it were others, secondary predators, massive eel-like serpents and armored leviathans, all tasting the scent of easy flesh above the waves. The survivors on the surface scrambled to react. Jonas's closest allies, including a few familiar faces hardened from past horrors, coordinated a frantic counterattack. Makeshift barricades were thrown up on beaches. Tourist vessels were evacuated under the guise of mechanical malfunctions. Naval reinforcements were called in, but the bureaucracy moved slower than the blood in the water. And still, the megalodon climbed. Below, Jonas executed his suicidal gambit. Luring the Titan into the thermal vent network required precision and insanity. Racing through collapsing tunnels, weaving between surging columns of superheated water, he led the beast on a deadly chase, taunting it with flashes of light and bursts of sound, baiting it closer and closer to the volcanic heart of the trench. But it was not just the megalodon that followed. One of the new creatures, sleek and eel-like with jaws like snapping steel traps, latched onto Jonas's battered submersible. With systems failing, alarms screaming, and pressure seals buckling, he had no choice but to engage in a brutal close-quarters battle within the flooded cockpit itself. It was a grim, muddy struggle against a creature born for killing. Jonas, bloodied and half-blind, fought with every scrap of strength he had left, ultimately impaling the beast on a broken metal strut. His victory cost him dearly. The submersible was now little more than a tomb with an engine. With no escape, he made the final move. Activating a distress beacon tuned to the geothermal frequencies, Jonas launched himself free of the sinking wreckage, swimming straight into the boiling maelstrom of the vents. Behind him, drawn by the thrumming energy, the megalodon plunged after him, its hunger blinding it to the trap. The heat, unimaginable in its fury, tore into the beast. Scales and flesh blistered and cracked. Roaring soundlessly in the crushing pressure, it twisted in agony before finally succumbing, its massive carcass tumbling into the churning heart of the earth. Above, the second battle raged. The secondary predators had reached the coastal waters, spreading terror through marinas and beaches. Families fled. Police and coast guards mounted frantic evacuations. Amidst the chaos, Jonas's allies, those who had survived the trench and returned to warn the world, coordinated defenses, using every available resource to beat back the tide. Improvised depth charges, harpoon batteries, experimental aquatic drones. Every weapon was thrown into the fray in a desperate attempt to hold the line. And just when it seemed the ocean would reclaim the land in a tide of blood, word came through: Jonas had succeeded. The alpha beast was dead. Without its dominance, the others began to turn on each other, instinct unraveling into bloody infighting. The surviving humans, battered and bleeding, seized the moment to strike, driving the survivors back into the depths. The water turned red and silent once more. The final images are not of triumphant parades or grand speeches. They are quieter, sadder. Jonas, battered nearly beyond recognition, being pulled from the surf by trembling hands. Survivors sitting silently on the beach, watching the endless, indifferent horizon. The realization that this victory, hard-won as it is only temporary. Because the ocean is patient. Because the trench is deeper than imagination. Because what lurks beneath is older, fiercer, and hungrier than anything humanity has yet dared to dream. In the aftermath, governments scramble to cover the disaster with sanitized reports and guarded warnings. Research into the trench is quietly but decisively shut down. Officially, the horrors are over. The seas are safe. But those who fought, who saw, know better. There is a moment near the end, a haunting glimpse caught by a deep-sea drone before all communication is lost. A shadow, larger than anything recorded, moving slowly, purposefully, far below where even the last battles raged. Something survived. Something watched. Something waited. And the world above, with its lights and noise and fragile dominion, would forget. It always forgets. Until the deep hungers again. For Jonas and the few who truly understand the ocean's heart, there is no forgetting. There is only vigilance. Only the memory of the cold, crushing dark. Only the whispering certainty that the real battle has yet to come. Because in the end, the trench is not conquered. It is merely sleeping. At the center of the chaos, the teeth, and the towering walls of water, there is always one figure who refuses to break. Jonas Taylor. A man whose soul seems as weathered and scarred as the deep itself, he is the reluctant hero, the survivor dragged back into the jaws of the ocean not because he seeks glory, but because he understands the truth no one else wants to face. Some battles find you whether you're ready or not. Jonas carries the weight of every decision like a lead weight strapped to his chest. From the first dive into the trench, you can see it in the way he moves, calculated, wary, but determined. He's not the cocky adventurer of so many action movies. He's the man who has stared into the abyss and come back with his heart hollowed out and refilled with something harder. He knows what's at stake. Not just survival, but the knowledge that one mistake, one misstep, doesn't end with his own death. It ends with devastation washing up on every shore. His leadership is quiet, almost reluctant. He doesn't bark orders. He offers grim truths. He doesn't inspire with rousing speeches. He inspires because he never quits. Even when the megalodon shatters steel and bone around him, even when the trench itself seems to conspire to crush him, Jonas never once hints at surrender. It's a quiet endurance, one that bleeds into every member of his crew and galvanizes them even when hope flickers down to the faintest ember. But beneath that stoic armor, Jonas is not invincible. His guilt is a ghost that follows him into every shadow. Guilt for the lives lost on previous missions, for the friends he couldn't save, for the horrors unleashed by human arrogance. It's a heavy burden, and it shows in the fleeting moments when his mask slips, the glance held too long on a teammate's corpse, the silence he carries after every narrow escape. He survives, but survival costs him something every time. Standing beside him, or sometimes against him, are a cast of characters just as bruised, just as vividly human. There's Mac, the old friend and operations leader who balances Jonas's brooding silence with a dry, unflinching pragmatism. Where Jonas sees the vast, horrifying scope of the threat, Max sees the logistics: fuel, weapons, timing. In many ways, he's the grounding force, pulling Jonas back when his survivor's instinct threatens to isolate him. Their friendship is built not on sentimentality, but on scars, on the quiet, unspoken understanding between two men who have buried too many friends to waste words. Then there's Jess, the brilliant marine biologist whose fierce intelligence is matched only by her stubbornness. Jess represents the scientific idealism that Jonas no longer believes in. To her, the trench was a chance to discover, to learn, to prove that humanity could coexist with the deep without conquering it. Watching that idealism curdle into horror as the true nature of their discoveries reveals itself is one of the film's quieter, more devastating arcs. Jess's journey is marked by a painful shedding of illusions. In the beginning, she speaks passionately about coexistence, about preserving and studying the creatures they find. But as the death toll rises and the monsters reveal themselves to be beyond reason or containment, Jess is forced to make the brutal choice between her ideals and survival. The moment she picks up a weapon, a harpoon launcher twice her size, and fires it into the side of a charging beast is more than an action beat. It's a symbolic death, the end of her innocence, the birth of a survivor. Among the newer faces is Monty, a cocky deep-sea pilot whose bravado hides a gnawing fear. He cracks jokes when the tension gets too thick. He flirts with death because it's easier than admitting he's terrified. In another film, Monty might have been comic relief. Here, he's something more tragic, a young man clinging to swagger as his last defense against the crushing reality that he's wildly out of his depth. Monty's arc is brief but potent. When the trench claims him, ripping him from safety in a single, terrible moment, there's no melodrama. No slow-motion heroics. Just a snapped tether, a flash of blood, and the gut-wrenching silence that follows. His death underlines a brutal truth. In this world, bravery is not a shield. The trench does not care how clever or bold you are. It swallows everyone just the same. Among the antagonists, Driscoll, the corporate magnate funding the expedition, embodies a different kind of monster. Where the megalodon kills out of instinct, Driscoll's predation is coldly calculated. Profit margins, patents, weaponization — these are the predators that stalk the modern world. Driscoll never once sets foot in the trench himself. He orchestrates, manipulates, and sacrifices from the safety of his fortified boardrooms. His belief that the deep can be tamed, packaged, and sold mirrors the oldest human arrogance, the same hubris that, time and time again, wakes things that should have been left to slumber. In one chilling scene, Driscoll watches, utterly detached, as live footage shows his mercenaries torn apart by creatures released from the trench. He doesn't flinch, doesn't look away. To him, it's not death. It's data. The monsters of the ocean are terrifying, but Driscoll reminds us that the real monsters wear suits and smile through negotiations. Another fascinating character is Mei, now older and stepping into her own as a force to be reckoned with. The once young girl who idolized Jonas has grown into a sharp, determined young woman, determined to carve her own place in this world of monsters and men. Her relationship with Jonas is layered, not quite daughter and father, but something achingly close. She challenges him when he retreats into fatalism. She pulls him back when grief threatens to drown him. And in doing so, she becomes a symbol of hope, not naive optimism, but a fierce, defiant hope that survives despite everything. Mei-Ying's bravery is different from Jonas's. Where he is slow and steady, tempered by experience, she is fire, rushing headlong into danger with the belief that action, not hesitation, saves lives. Watching her take risks, watching her confront horrors that would break lesser souls, you see the seeds of a new kind of survivor, one who might just endure where even the old guard falters. Even the creatures themselves, though wordless and ancient, feel like characters in their own right. The megalodon, vast and relentless, is not merely a monster. It is hunger incarnate. It moves not with mindless rage but with terrifying purpose. Every breach, every snap of its colossal jaws, every calculated retreat before striking again suggests an intelligence shaped by millennia in the dark. It is not evil. It simply is, a force of nature as primal and implacable as a hurricane. The smaller predators, too, the armored serpents, the swarming hunters, bring their own kind of character to the world. They act not just as obstacles, but as manifestations of the trench's will, defending the ancient secrets that humanity has dared to trespass upon. As the story crescendos toward its brutal climax, the bonds between these characters are tested to the breaking point. Jonas sacrifices again and again, not because he believes he will survive, but because he cannot bear the thought of failing those who still can. Jess loses her faith but finds her fire. Mac, steady to the end, holds the fragile threads of the operation together with bloodied hands. Mei-Ying steps fully into her strength, daring to challenge monsters both human and ancient with nothing but courage and a stubborn refusal to yield. And Driscoll, fittingly, meets his end not at the hands of a human adversary, but swallowed by the very monsters he thought he could control. In his screams, there is no redemption, only the echo of a lesson unlearned. In the end, what lingers is not just the bodies left behind or the cities bruised by the battle. It is the humanity of it all. The way Jonas, battered and breathless, still drags himself toward another fight because survival is all he has left. The way Mei-Ying stares down the future with burning eyes. The way Jess picks up her broken ideals, reworks them into something harder, something truer. They are not invincible. They are not untouchable. But they endure. In a world where titans rise from the deep and monsters wear human faces, endurance, quiet, stubborn, fiercely human endurance, is the greatest weapon of all. Sometimes, when a movie bursts onto the screen with the force of a tidal wave, audiences can only imagine the chaos that brewed behind the camera to bring such a spectacle to life. In the case of this aquatic epic, the currents of the story weren't the only things swirling with drama, surprise, and a touch of madness. Beneath the polished final cut, the making of this cinematic Leviathan hid its own set of legends. Tales that are as jaw-dropping, strange, and unforgettable as the monsters rising from the depths themselves. It all began long before the first camera rolled, in boardrooms where ambition collided with pure, oceanic terror. The idea to create a sequel was an obvious one. The hunger for more deep-sea carnage had only grown after the first massive splash. But what wasn't obvious was how they would pull it off without simply repeating the first film's notes. The challenge? Bigger creatures, deeper waters, darker thrills, and somehow still making it feel real. One of the first unusual hurdles came with the decision to shoot a significant chunk of the movie using a hybrid system of practical effects and CGI. Normally, for a story populated by prehistoric monsters, studios would lean heavily on computer-generated imagery. But here, the creative team insisted that wherever possible, physical models and water tanks would be used to lend the scenes a tangible weight and texture. To make this work, they commissioned a full-scale megalodon mouth, massive, hand-built, and terrifying even before the cameras started rolling. It was so realistic, in fact, that several crew members refused to swim near it during tests in the giant water tank. Stunt divers joked nervously about accidentally getting eaten during nighttime shoots when the lighting made the massive jaws loom from the depths like a genuine predator. And speaking of that tank, calling it a tank almost undersells its scope. It was a specially constructed, stadium-sized underwater environment, capable of mimicking not just the appearance but also the deadly currents and chaotic visibility of deep-sea conditions. During filming, unexpected microcurrents developed inside the tank, sometimes sweeping equipment, and occasionally actors, off their marks. Safety divers became as important to the production as the cinematographers themselves, with some days requiring almost as many lifeguards on set as camera operators. But the strangest water hazard wasn't even the megalodon model. It was jellyfish. Real ones. At one point, after months of careful environmental control, the artificial ecosystem in the tank unexpectedly bloomed real jellyfish, carried in as microscopic larvae on the equipment. One morning, cast and crew arrived to find hundreds of tiny, translucent creatures pulsing in the water. Some were harmless. Some not so much. It turned the day's shoot into an impromptu underwater obstacle course, and several unlucky divers had to spend the evening nursing stings. The production's bad luck with aquatic life didn't stop there. During one key location shoot in Thailand, a tropical storm blew in overnight, turning the previously crystal-clear water into a swirling soup of debris and sand. Sets painstakingly built underwater were torn apart, and large props, including a miniature model of a destroyed coastal village, were swept out to sea. Local fishermen reported finding tiny houses and plastic palm trees floating miles offshore days later, turning the event into an accidental art installation on the water. Then there was the incident with the mechanical shark. One of the animatronic models, affectionately nicknamed Chompy by the crew, developed a mind of its own. During a test of its hydraulic bite mechanism, a glitch caused the jaws to snap shut unpredictably. It bit through 2 heavy-duty steel poles and 1 unfortunate camera crane in less than an hour. No one was injured, but after that, no one trusted Chompy without giving it a wide berth and a respectful nod, as if it were a real predator who might, at any moment, decide to make a meal out of the filmmakers. Tension, of course, ran high during these chaotic days. But alongside the stress came an unexpected sense of camaraderie. Cast and crew bonded over the sheer absurdity of the obstacles they faced. Jason Statham, a seasoned action star no stranger to stunts, took it upon himself to lighten the mood with impromptu diving contests during breaks, challenging crew members to underwater races across the giant tank. One particularly famous day saw Statham race a stunt diver while wearing a full megalodon fin strapped to his back, paddling furiously as the crew howled with laughter. Other actors weren't as comfortable in the deep. Several key players had to undergo intensive scuba and free diving training just to perform their scenes. One actor, notorious for his fear of open water, reportedly insisted on having a spotter diver within arm's reach at all times, even during shallow scenes shot on sound stages. Despite initial anxiety, by the end of filming, he was comfortably performing his own underwater stunts, proof that the trench had claimed another soul in the best way. Of course, filming underwater brought its own unique set of vocal challenges. Dialogue had to be carefully choreographed because traditional speaking wasn't possible in submerged scenes. Actors often had to memorize breathing patterns along with their lines, using specialized equipment to deliver their performances between quick bursts of oxygen from hidden regulators. For scenes involving panic or screaming underwater, the actors had to learn how to safely release air in a way that looked authentic without actually endangering themselves by exhaling too much at once. The special effects team also had some incredible challenges of their own. In one key sequence, the team had to simulate the appearance of bioluminescent algae swirling around a character as they swam through the deep trench. Initially, CGI was considered, but after much debate, the team opted to create a practical version by using a specially designed suit coated in reactive pigments that glowed under blacklight conditions in the tank. The effect was breathtaking, but only worked for about 5 minutes at a time before the pigments degraded, meaning takes had to be rushed with military precision. Other actors weren't as comfortable in the deep. Several key players had to undergo intensive scuba and free diving training just to perform their scenes. One actor, notorious for his fear of open water, reportedly insisted on having a spotter diver within arm's reach at all times, even during shallow scenes shot on sound stages. Despite initial anxiety, by the end of filming, he was comfortably performing his own underwater stunts, proof that the trench had claimed another soul in the best way. Of course, filming underwater brought its own unique set of vocal challenges. Dialogue had to be carefully choreographed because traditional speaking wasn't possible in submerged scenes. Actors often had to memorize breathing patterns along with their lines, using specialized equipment to deliver their performances between quick bursts of oxygen from hidden regulators. For scenes involving panic or screaming underwater, the actors had to learn how to safely release air in a way that looked authentic without actually endangering themselves by exhaling too much at once. The special effects team also had some incredible challenges of their own. In one key sequence, The team had to simulate the appearance of bioluminescent algae swirling around a character as they swam through the deep trench. Initially, CGI was considered. But after much debate, the team opted to create a practical version by using a specially designed suit coated in reactive pigments that glowed under black-light conditions in the tank. The effect was breathtaking, but only worked for about 5 minutes at a time before the pigments degraded, meaning takes had to be rushed with military precision. Another unusual fact? The filmmakers consulted with real marine biologists to design the secondary creatures unleashed from the trench. Rather than inventing monsters wholesale, the team studied prehistoric aquatic life forms, massive armored fish, nightmarish eels, crustaceans the size of cars, and created hybrids that might plausibly have evolved in the crushing darkness of the trench. Several of the mutations were so well researched that early concept art was mistaken for genuine speculative science illustrations by some marine researchers who visited the set. And then there was the surprise visit. During a key location shoot, an unannounced, curious visitor wandered onto the beach where the production had set up base, a juvenile whale shark, lost and confused by the shallow waters. Filming ground to a halt as the cast and crew carefully guided the gentle giant back toward deeper water, an experience that many later described as one of the most surreal and moving moments of the entire production. It was, in many ways, a quiet reminder that while humans might invent monsters, the ocean already held wonders beyond anything a studio could dream up. As filming wrapped, cast and crew held a mock wake for Chompy the shark animatronic, gathering around the battered, beloved machine with mock solemnity, telling exaggerated tales of the mechanical beast's many rampages. Someone even crafted a mechanical shark tooth trophy from broken prop pieces, awarded to the diver who had survived the most close calls with malfunctioning machinery. In the end, despite, or perhaps because of, all the madness, the production came together to create a film that felt wild, dangerous, and alive. Every jellyfish sting, every rogue current, every shredded piece of underwater scenery fed into the final product's rough, thrilling energy. Sometimes, making a movie about survival against impossible odds isn't just fiction. Sometimes, it's prophecy. And sometimes, the greatest monsters aren't the ones the audience sees. They're the ones the cast and crew fought behind the scenes, in the dark, in the deep, armed with nothing but stubbornness, courage, and a willingness to swim through hell to bring a story to life. It's easy to lose yourself in the spectacle, the thunderous roar of water splitting apart under the weight of ancient beasts, the chaos of destruction rendered in vivid, heart-pounding detail. But beneath the crashing waves and snarling jaws, there lies a different current, one that pulls at something deeper in the viewer. To truly understand the impact and resonance of this aquatic odyssey, you have to dive past the surface thrills and swim down to the darker, quieter truths that shape its heart. At first glance, the descent into the trench feels like classic adventure storytelling. Brave explorers poking at the edges of the unknown, daring the abyss to respond. It's a motif that resonates deeply because it's woven into the human spirit itself, the relentless urge to uncover what lies just beyond sight. The early events of the film capitalize on this instinct, drawing the audience into the grandeur and wonder of the expedition. The initial dive scenes are filled with awe, with beautiful haunting shots of bioluminescent lifeforms flickering in the dark, ancient landscapes unspoiled by human hands, and the intoxicating promise that this time humanity might discover rather than destroy. But then the walls of the story begin to close in. The breach of the thermocline, that delicate barrier between the safe world and the world of monsters, is not just a plot device. Critically, it serves as the film's first true thematic gut punch. It's a metaphor, plain and sharp. Humanity, driven by curiosity and greed, always pushes too far. Always breaks the boundaries meant to protect us. And when those walls fall, the consequences are immediate, brutal, and unstoppable. The massacre that follows isn't played for mere shock value. It's filmed with a kind of grim inevitability. The creatures, vast and relentless, don't hunt for sport or cruelty. They hunt because they can. Because survival is their oldest, purest instinct. Watching the explorers, so small against the crushing enormity of the trench's guardians, reminds the audience that despite all our technology and arrogance, we are fragile creatures in an ancient world that does not care for our ambitions. Critics were quick to note how the film refused to glorify the violence. The deaths aren't choreographed into elegant ballets of destruction. They're messy, chaotic, unfair. 1 second, a character is sharing a nervous joke. The next, they are torn away by a shadow in the dark. The camera doesn't linger on the gore. It lingers on the stunned silence that follows, the empty water where a life used to be. It's a reminder that nature's fury is not cinematic. It is sudden, indifferent, absolute. One of the film's most significant events, the destruction of the secondary platform, is a perfect encapsulation of this philosophy. What should have been a safe haven becomes a coffin. The beacon they hoped would bring salvation instead becomes a tombstone. From a critical perspective, it's a devastating commentary on the failure of human planning when faced with forces we cannot control. This theme is hammered home by the reveal of the corporate betrayal. When it is uncovered that the sabotage of the beacon was orchestrated by human greed, the film tilts its lens even further inward. The monsters from the trench are terrifying, yes. But the true villain, the one who opened the door and ripped away any hope of survival, is human. It's not nature that poses the greatest threat. It's the insatiable hunger of those who see wonder and think only of profit. In these moments, the film elevates itself beyond creature feature thrills into sharp, biting social commentary. Viewers aren't just rooting for Jonas and his team to survive the megalodon. They're rooting for the survival of humility itself, the desperate hope that someone, somewhere, will recognize that some powers are not meant to be harnessed, that some mysteries must remain mysteries. Critically, the film's structure mirrors the emotional descent of its characters. As the survivors are forced deeper and deeper into the collapsing trench, their hope crumbles piece by piece. The lighting shifts subtly from cold blues and silvers into harsher reds and sickly greens. The camera angles grow tighter, more claustrophobic. The sound design presses in on the audience with a pressure that almost feels physical, mimicking the weight of the ocean above. When Jonas makes his suicidal decision to lure the megalodon into the geothermal vents, it's not framed as a triumphant last stand. It's filmed almost like a funeral procession. Slow, heavy, weighted with the knowledge that heroism here isn't about glory, it's about grim necessity. About buying just a few more minutes for those who might live to see another dawn. This is where the emotional resonance of the film hits its peak. It's not in the battles, not in the explosions. It's in the weary, bloodied face of a man who knows he will likely die, and does it anyway. It's in the raw, silent grief of the survivors, who understand that survival isn't victory. It's just survival. Critics praised this brutal honesty. There are no cheap catharses here. No neat bows tied at the end. Just the acknowledgement that the monsters are still out there. That the trench is still waiting. That some victories are just pauses in an endless war against forces beyond comprehension. The secondary climax, the surface battle against the unleashed horrors, is filmed in chaotic, disorienting flashes. Ships torn apart, beaches evacuated in blind terror, humans scrambling like ants under the indifferent gaze of ancient predators. It's here that the film circles back to its core message. We are not masters of the earth. We are guests. And we have forgotten how to be grateful. The death of Driscoll is perhaps the most satisfying moment of brutal justice in the story. Watching him consumed by the very creatures he sought to exploit is a cathartic release for the audience, but it's not played for triumph. It's a grim reminder that nature doesn't distinguish between the greedy and the innocent. It swallows them all, without preference, without pity. In the final scenes, as Jonas is pulled from the surf, battered and broken but breathing, the film leaves the audience with a silence heavy with meaning. There is no promise that the creatures are gone. No assurance that humanity has learned its lesson. Only the battered survivors and the endless, unknowable sea. It's this refusal to offer easy answers that makes the film resonate so powerfully. It dares to suggest that survival is messy, that victories are temporary, that the ocean, ancient and implacable, will always be there, patient, vast, and waiting. From a critical perspective, it is this layering of spectacle and sorrow, of action and existential dread, that sets the story apart. It could have been just another monster movie. Instead, it became a meditation on humanity's place in a world that doesn't need us. A reminder that some boundaries are not meant to be crossed. A prayer for humility whispered into the roaring abyss. And perhaps a warning. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that humanity rarely listens until it's too late. And the deep waits. Always. It's easy to lose yourself in the spectacle, the thunderous roar of water splitting apart under the weight of ancient beasts, the chaos of destruction rendered in vivid, heart-pounding detail. But beneath the crashing waves and snarling jaws, there lies a different current, one that pulls at something deeper in the viewer. To truly understand the impact and resonance of this aquatic odyssey, you have to dive past the surface thrills and swim down to the darker, quieter truths that shape its heart. At first glance, the descent into the trench feels like classic adventure storytelling. Brave explorers poking at the edges of the unknown, daring the abyss to respond. It's a motif that resonates deeply because it's woven into the human spirit itself, the relentless urge to uncover what lies just beyond sight. The early events of the film capitalize on this instinct, drawing the audience into the grandeur and wonder of the expedition. The initial dive scenes are filled with awe, with beautiful, haunting shots of bioluminescent lifeforms flickering in the dark, ancient landscapes unspoiled by human hands, and the intoxicating promise that this time, humanity might discover rather than destroy. But then the walls of the story begin to close in the breach of the thermocline. That delicate barrier between the safe world and the world of monsters is not just a plot device. Critically, it serves as the film's first true thematic gut punch. It's a metaphor, plain and sharp. Humanity, driven by curiosity and greed, always pushes too far. Always breaks the boundaries meant to protect us. And when those walls fall, the consequences are immediate, brutal, and unstoppable. The massacre that follows isn't played for mere shock value. It's filmed with a kind of grim inevitability. The creatures, vast and relentless, don't hunt for sport or cruelty. They hunt because they can. Because survival is their oldest, purest instinct. Watching the explorers, so small against the crushing enormity of the trench's guardians, reminds the audience that despite all our technology and arrogance, we are fragile creatures in an ancient world that does not care for our ambitions. Critics were quick to note how the film refused to glorify the violence. The deaths aren't choreographed into elegant ballets of destruction. They're messy, chaotic, unfair. 1 second, a character is sharing a nervous joke. The next, they are torn away by a shadow in the dark. The camera doesn't linger on the gore. It lingers on the stunned silence that follows, the empty water where a life used to be. It's a reminder that nature's fury is not cinematic. It is sudden, indifferent, absolute. One of the film's most significant events, the destruction of the secondary platform, is a perfect encapsulation of this philosophy. What should have been a safe haven becomes a coffin. The beacon they hoped would bring salvation instead becomes a tombstone. From a critical perspective, it's a devastating commentary on the failure of human planning when faced with forces we cannot control. This theme is hammered home by the reveal of the corporate betrayal. When it is uncovered that the sabotage of the beacon was orchestrated by human greed, the film tilts its lens even further inward. The monsters from the trench are terrifying, yes. But the true villain, the one who opened the door and ripped away any hope of survival, is human. It's not nature that poses the greatest threat. It's the insatiable hunger of those who see wonder and think only of profit. In these moments, the film elevates itself beyond creature feature thrills into sharp, biting social commentary. Viewers aren't just rooting for Jonas and his team to survive the megalodon. They're rooting for the survival of humility itself, the desperate hope that someone, somewhere, will recognize that some powers are not meant to be harnessed, that some mysteries must remain mysteries. Critically, the film's structure mirrors the emotional descent of its characters. As the survivors are forced deeper and deeper into the collapsing trench, Their hope crumbles piece by piece. The lighting shifts subtly from cold blues and silvers into harsher reds and sickly greens. The camera angles grow tighter, more claustrophobic. The sound design presses in on the audience with a pressure that almost feels physical, mimicking the weight of the ocean above. When Jonas makes his suicidal decision to lure the megalodon into the geothermal vents, it's not framed as a triumphant last stand. It's filmed almost like a funeral procession. Slow, heavy, weighted with the knowledge that heroism here isn't about glory, it's about grim necessity. About buying just a few more minutes for those who might live to see another dawn. This is where the emotional resonance of the film hits its peak. It's not in the battles, not in the explosions. It's in the weary, bloodied face of a man who knows he will likely die, and does it anyway. It's in the raw, silent grief of the survivors, who understand that survival isn't victory. It's just survival. Critics praised this brutal honesty. There are no cheap catharses here. No neat bows tied at the end. Just the acknowledgement that the monsters are still out there. That the trench is still waiting. That some victories are just pauses in an endless war against forces beyond comprehension. The secondary climax, the surface battle against the unleashed horrors, is filmed in chaotic, disorienting flashes. Ships torn apart, beaches evacuated in blind terror, humans scrambling like ants under the indifferent gaze of ancient predators. It's here that the film circles back to its core message. We are not masters of the earth. We are guests, and we have forgotten how to be grateful. The death of Driscoll is perhaps the most satisfying moment of brutal justice in the story. Watching him consumed by the very creatures he sought to exploit is a cathartic release for the audience, but it's not played for triumph. It's a grim reminder that nature doesn't distinguish between the greedy and the innocent. It swallows them all, without preference, without pity. In the final scenes, as Jonas is pulled from the surf, battered and broken but breathing, the film leaves the audience with a silence heavy with meaning. There is no promise that the creatures are gone. No assurance that humanity has learned its lesson. Only the battered survivors and the endless, unknowable sea. It's this refusal to offer easy answers that makes the film resonate so powerfully. It dares to suggest that survival is messy. That victories are temporary. That the ocean, ancient and implacable, will always be there, patient, vast, and waiting. From a critical perspective, it is this layering of spectacle and sorrow, of action and existential dread, that sets the story apart. It could have been just another monster movie. Instead, it became a meditation on humanity's place in a world that doesn't need us. A reminder that some boundaries are not meant to be crossed. A prayer for humility whispered into the roaring abyss. And perhaps a warning. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that humanity rarely listens until it's too late. And the deep? The deep waits. Always. From the very first moment that a sequel was green-lit, the production team knew they weren't just trying to make a bigger movie, they were trying to outswim a legend. The first deep-sea adventure had made an enormous splash, and expectations for the next chapter were colossal. But as the crew would soon discover, capturing a story this massive wasn't just about building bigger sharks or louder explosions. It was about surviving a production that would test their endurance as fiercely as the trench tested Jonas and his team. Planning began in late 2020, a time when the world itself was grappling with real uncertainty and isolation. Somehow, it felt fitting to craft a story about unseen monsters rising from the dark. From the outset, the filmmakers agreed. This sequel had to dive deeper, not just literally into the trench, but into character, atmosphere, and terror. The production design team became obsessed with authenticity. They studied real oceanic trenches, from the Mariana to the Kermadec, poring over every scrap of scientific research they could find. Their goal was not to create a fantasy version of the deep, but to mimic the claustrophobic, alien beauty of a place untouched by sunlight for millions of years. Every rock formation, every cloud of sediment, every flickering deep-sea creature seen in the film was the result of months of meticulous research and world-building. And yet, building the deep came with practical challenges that no amount of imagination could overcome easily, since sending cameras to real trench depths was both cost-prohibitive and incredibly risky. The team constructed massive sets in sound stages and water tanks, some so vast that they had to lease abandoned shipyards and retrofit them into filming locations. Water was always the enemy and the ally. Every day, the crew battled fluctuating temperatures, the impossible task of keeping massive tanks clean and clear, and the creeping exhaustion of working submerged for hours at a time. One of the biggest and most jaw-dropping set pieces, the underwater geothermal vent system, required the construction of an elaborate underwater maze. It spanned the size of several football fields, complete with hidden entrances, pressure-activated light rigs to mimic bioluminescence, and concealed mechanical rigs to simulate sudden collapses and geyser eruptions. It was, by all accounts, a nightmare to shoot in, but the results, captured on camera, were otherworldly. Cast members had to undergo extensive training just to survive the demands of filming. Before principal photography even began, every actor slated to perform underwater scenes went through an intensive 3-month diving boot camp. It wasn't just about learning to swim. They had to master buoyancy control, silent communication, controlled breathing under high stress, and emergency procedures for entanglement or equipment failure. For many of the actors, it was their first true taste of the ocean's indifferent danger. Jason Statham, known for his physical prowess, took to the training like a fish to water. Reports from the set tell of his relentless work ethic, performing complex sequences without stunt doubles whenever possible, challenging himself to push further, hold his breath longer, and dive deeper. During one particularly grueling shoot, he set an unofficial record on the production for the longest continuous breath hold during an underwater action sequence, over 4 minutes without surfacing. Of course, not every moment behind the scenes was so serious. The tension and danger of the shoot bred a strange kind of gallows humor among the cast and crew. Pranks became legendary. Divers planted fake sea monsters, made of rubber and fishing line, just outside the actor's field of vision. On one memorable afternoon, a remote-controlled inflatable shark photobombed a very serious emotional scene, causing the entire crew, and the director, to dissolve into helpless laughter. The animatronic sharks, designed in painstaking detail, had personalities all their own. One, affectionately dubbed Sharky by the crew, developed a tendency to malfunction in oddly comedic ways, snapping its jaws randomly, spinning in place, and once nearly capsizing a dive platform during a critical take. The puppeteers operating Sharky took to giving it nicknames and backstories, treating it like a misbehaving cast member. Visual effects artists also played a massive role, though they were determined to integrate their work seamlessly with practical elements. Instead of creating fully CGI creatures, they overlaid digital enhancements onto animatronic performances, blending real-world textures, sharkskin modeled after preserved fossils, eye movements studied from apex predators, into the final models. This hybrid approach gave the monsters an unsettling realism that no amount of pixels alone could have achieved. One particularly complex sequence, the deep-sea chase through the trench's jagged spires, was storyboarded almost 2 years before filming began. It required combining real underwater footage, miniature models shot at high speed, CGI enhancements, and live-action performances stitched together frame by frame. It took a team of 60 artists 9 months to finalize the 3-minute scene, creating one of the most heart-stopping sequences in the film. Meanwhile, the writing team worked behind the scenes to ensure that the story would balance character development with sheer spectacle. Writers dug deep into the psychology of survival, studying accounts from deep-sea explorers, submarine accidents, and even astronauts to capture the mental toll of facing the unknown. Their efforts paid off in the small, human moments sprinkled throughout the chaos. Glances exchanged between comrades who might not live another hour, whispered jokes that feel like lifelines thrown in the dark. Music, too, played a crucial and often overlooked role in the film's atmosphere. The composer, a rising star known for blending orchestral and electronic elements, created a soundscape that thrummed with tension and dread. Rather than traditional melodies, the score often mimicked the sounds of sonar pings, groaning steel, and distant whale songs distorted into something alien and unsettling. It wasn't just background music. It was the sound of the deep itself, alive and watching. One of the most beautiful accidents of the production came during a location shoot in the South Pacific. While filming surface scenes against the breathtaking backdrop of real islands, the crew stumbled upon a naturally occurring phenomenon known as sea sparkle, tiny plankton that emit a blue bioluminescent glow when disturbed. That night, as actors rehearsed boat evacuation scenes, the water around them lit up with eerie blue fire every time a hand or touched it. The footage was so striking that the director rewrote several scenes to incorporate the phenomenon, adding an ethereal, haunting beauty to moments of frantic terror. And then, there was the ending. Unlike many blockbusters that test multiple endings, the filmmakers here were united from early drafts in knowing exactly how the story had to close. Not with triumph, not with closure, but with a question mark. They shot alternate versions, of course, some more hopeful, some more bombastic, but always returned to the quieter, more unsettling ending that finally made the cut. It was a choice born from a deep respect for the audience's intelligence, and for the ocean's enduring mysteries. The production wrapped after 148 grueling days. When the final scene was shot, a slow, panning shot across the endless ocean horizon, cast and crew erupted into a spontaneous standing ovation. Tears mixed with salt water. They had not just made a movie. They had survived an odyssey together, a battle against nature, technology, and the limits of human endurance. Looking back, the filmmakers often described the production as an adventure that mirrored the story itself. They dove into the unknown. They faced monsters, both real and imagined. And they emerged, not unscathed, but stronger. Forever marked by the trench. Because in the end, creating a story about survival against impossible odds means embracing the chaos, trusting the ocean, and daring to swim deeper, even when the dark is all you can see. The world above the waterline fades almost immediately. Once the story plunges into the deep, the ocean becomes not just a setting, but a living, breathing character of its own, vast, merciless, and hauntingly beautiful. It is not simply a backdrop for the drama. It shapes every moment, every breath, every heartbeat of the story, pressing down on the characters with its invisible, crushing weight. From the first frame that dips beneath the surface, it's clear. This is not a place humans belong. It is ancient. It is alien. And it is watching the surface world that opens the film is deceptively bright and lively, framed with sweeping shots of turquoise seas, bustling docks, and gleaming research vessels cutting through gentle waves. Sunlight glitters off the water, and the colors burst with optimism, the kind of hope that can only exist before everything falls apart. Wide, steady aerial shots track the sleek ships moving toward the unknown, the ocean stretching endlessly beyond them like a shimmering invitation. There's almost a false sense of security to it all, a trick played by the surface before the true descent begins. The trench itself, the heart of the setting, is a masterpiece of claustrophobic grandeur. It's introduced with a slow, reverent descent. The color palette shifts subtly as the submersibles sink lower, blue giving way to deep indigos and blacks. The sun disappears completely, swallowed by the water, and with it goes the comforting sense of up and down. There is only the crushing pressure and the tiny pools of light cast by the human explorers. Cinematography becomes tighter, more intimate, emphasizing the fragility of the machines and the humans inside them against the overwhelming emptiness surrounding them. As the trench yawns open beneath them, the camera pulls back in a sudden wide shot, showing the minuscule lights of the subs against the massive chasms and towering stone formations. It's a visual gut punch, the realization of just how small and outmatched they are. Here, in the land forgotten by time, everything is hostile simply by existing. Even the rock seems to loom and breathe, ancient and unknowable. Lighting plays a critical, almost psychological role in the trench sequences. Artificial lights on the subs and suits slice thin lines through the darkness, never illuminating more than a few feet ahead. Shadows become the enemy, vast and moving, hinting at monstrous shapes just beyond the edge of vision. At times, cinematographer Haris Zamberlukos, tasked with crafting the film's visual language, lets the darkness nearly consume the frame, leaving audiences straining to see, to anticipate, to breathe. It's a masterstroke of mood, keeping viewers locked in the same terrifying uncertainty as the characters. Colors are used sparingly but with devastating effect. The cold, sterile whites and blues of the expedition's technology contrast sharply with the organic, almost sickly greens and reds that bleed through from the natural world. When the geothermal vents erupt, bathing everything in a hellish glow, the screen feels like it's burning, an alarming, almost apocalyptic shift from the chill of the deep to a sudden inferno. The creatures that emerge from this world are designed to feel of it, not imposed upon it. Bioluminescence pulses through their forms, faint and ghostly, evoking the real-life adaptations of deep-sea life that rely on glow over sight. But unlike the delicate beauty of nature documentaries, these lights feel wrong, flickering, spasming, warning of the violence just beneath the surface. Close-ups linger on translucent skin stretched over armored bone, jaws that unhinge far beyond natural limits, and eyes that seem to reflect not curiosity, but ancient hunger. The cinematography here dances between awe and terror, never letting the audience settle into either. When the monsters attack, the camera work becomes frantic, handheld, jittering, cutting rapidly between perspectives to mirror the disorientation of the characters. During quieter moments, long, slow tracking shots glide past abandoned wreckage, bones half buried in sediment, and fields of strange, twitching flora, building a sense of creeping dread that something is always watching from just beyond the light. One of the most stunning visual sequences occurs during the mid-film escape attempt through the forest of underwater thermal vents. Massive columns of superheated water and volcanic gases spew from the ocean floor, creating a landscape that is both awe-inspiring and deadly. The camera soars between the vents, sometimes so close that the screen distorts with heat shimmer, making the environment feel alive and unstable. The characters weave through this labyrinth, and every movement feels like threading a needle between annihilation and salvation. Light dances through the clouds of gas, creating fleeting rainbows that add a strange, tragic beauty to the danger. Above the trench, when the monsters breach the surface world, the contrast could not be sharper. The beach scenes are chaotic and sun-bleached, the saturated yellows and bright blues of summer paradise twisted into something grotesque as blood stains the sand and bodies scatter like broken shells. The cinematography deliberately refuses to romanticize these attacks. There are no slow-motion hero shots, only frantic, handheld chaos as bystanders flee in terror and nature reclaims the domain it once ruled without challenge. Sound design becomes its own form of cinematography here, layering the visuals with an invisible but oppressive atmosphere. Below the surface, the world is almost silent. Only the soft hum of submersibles, the creak of strained metal, and the eerie, distant groans of shifting rock. When monsters move, the water carries their passage as deep, resonant vibrations felt more in the chest than heard with the ears. Above, the sounds are sharper. Screaming, roaring engines, the thunderous crack of breaking wood and steel. Together, the visual and auditory elements create a sensory experience that is fully immersive, pulling the viewer into the rising panic. The design of human spaces, the submarines, the research stations, also reflects the thematic core of the film. Everything humans build is shown as fragile, temporary, and ultimately doomed. The camera lingers on flickering lights, leaking seals, crumbling platforms. Even at their most technologically advanced, human creations are dwarfed and undone by the ocean's timeless might. There's a visual poetry to the way these constructs are slowly consumed by the setting, reduced to wreckage swallowed by silt and algae. The filmmakers also made inspired use of verticality, a rarity in action films. Characters aren't just moving forward and backward, left and right. They are constantly forced to navigate three-dimensional space, ascending and descending through massive underwater canyons, darting between sinking debris, being pulled upward by sudden updrafts or dragged downward into the trench's endless depths. The cinematography embraces this disorientation, often flipping perspectives to show characters upside down, sideways, tumbling through currents without any grounding point. It's a deliberate choice meant to reflect the loss of control, the terrifying realization that down here, Direction is an illusion and survival is a coin flip. As the story hurtles toward its climax, the visual tone shifts once again. The surface world is shrouded in storm clouds, the once bright paradise now a gray, angry cauldron. Rain lashes the ocean, and the light dims to a bruised, sickly color, mirroring the desperate mood of the final battle. The monsters rise, no longer hidden, their massive forms silhouetted against flashes of lightning, looking less like animals and more like vengeful gods returning to a world that forgot them. And yet, even in the carnage, the filmmakers never lose sight of the ocean's terrible beauty. There are moments of silence amid the chaos, moments where the camera pulls back, showing the sheer majesty of these creatures, the vastness of the sea swallowing the petty struggles of humankind. These moments remind the audience that nature is not evil. It is not cruel. It simply is. And it is bigger, older, and more enduring than any one species' fleeting dominion. In the final scenes, after the monsters have retreated or been vanquished, the ocean reclaims its eerie calm. The last shots are slow, lingering, heavy with meaning. The sun setting over a deceptively still surface, wreckage sinking slowly out of sight, and far below, the trench yawning open once again, untouched, waiting. The use of fading light, the soft distortion of the camera as it peers into the murk, suggests that the story is not over. That it never really can be. Because the setting, the trench, the ocean, the deep, is not a place where stories end. It is where they begin. And it is patient. It is eternal. It waits for the next foolhardy dreamer, the next greedy hand reaching into the dark. And when they come, the ocean will be ready. Making a movie about surviving the deep demanded a production that felt almost like an expedition itself. From the moment the cameras rolled, it was clear this wouldn't be a smooth, polished, studio-bound affair. This was going to be a battle, not just against the ordinary challenges of filmmaking, but against nature, against machinery, and sometimes even against common sense. And that's what made it magical. Behind every breathtaking underwater shot and every pulse-pounding chase, there was a story, a chaotic, hilarious, terrifying story, about the human beings who risked a little bit of themselves to bring it all to life. From day one, water ruled everything. The production's main sets were spread between giant indoor tanks, outdoor ocean rigs, and coastal beach locations that had to be transformed into scenes of carnage and awe. Filming in and around water is famously difficult. It slows everything down, ruins equipment, exhausts the actors, and introduces 1,000 tiny, unpredictable variables. Yet the crew leaned into it with a kind of stubborn, laughing determination that mirrored the film's own themes of survival. One of the first lessons learned was a simple one. Nothing stays dry on a set like this. Scripts dissolved in hands. Headsets short-circuited. Costumes grew heavy with salt water until actors had to be hauled out of the tank just to walk across the set. Director Ben Wheatley joked early on that they needed a Noah's Ark of equipment just to get through a single day of shooting. The bond among the cast and crew was forged almost immediately, a brotherhood and sisterhood of the soaked and the frozen. Veteran stunt divers mixed with fresh-faced young actors learning to trust each other when every movement, every scene, depended on perfect timing and absolute trust. If one actor missed their mark underwater, it could mean an entire setup ruined, or worse, someone in real danger. Jason Statham, long celebrated for his action prowess, quickly became the de facto team leader not just on screen, but off. Always first in the water, always volunteering for the harder shots, he set a tone of professionalism without ever letting the pressure get too heavy. Between takes, he cracked jokes, challenged crew members to breath-holding contests, and famously started an unofficial deep dive club. Anyone who could swim to the bottom of the main tank without fins or assistance earned a dubious honor, a soggy, half-disintegrated sticker that read, King of the Deep. Meanwhile, other members of the cast weren't quite so eager to embrace the abyss. One actor, terrified of deep water but determined to do their own stunts, had to overcome their phobia during filming. During early rehearsals, they froze just inches beneath the surface, unable to continue. It could have been disastrous. Instead, the entire crew rallied around them, including Jason, who personally spent hours coaching them through breathing techniques and slow, shallow dives until they could swim comfortably into the murky depths without a hint of fear. By the end of shooting, that actor completed one of the movie's most daring underwater escape sequences, a scene that now carries a genuine sense of triumph because, for them, it truly was. The mechanical beasts of the film, particularly the animatronic shark heads, became legendary in their own right. Dubbed Bruce's cousins by the effects team in a nod to Jaws, these massive rigs were responsible for some of the production's most chaotic moments. One animatronic shark was so powerful that when it malfunctioned during a close-up scene, it tore loose from its guide cables and smashed into a lighting rig, sending the crew scrambling. No one was hurt, but from that day on, a little running joke persisted across the set. Before any scene involving the mechanical sharks, someone would solemnly intone, "Release the Kraken," sending waves of laughter through the waterlogged crew. Stunts, too, carried their own particular brand of madness. One ambitious sequence involved a stunt performer strapped to a specially rigged bite rig that allowed a shark to appear as if it was tossing its prey through the water. The rig worked beautifully, until the third take, when a combination of water currents and mechanical hiccups launched the poor stuntman several meters into the air, a graceful arc of flailing limbs caught perfectly on camera. He surfaced roaring with laughter, demanding another go before the crew could even recover. But it wasn't just the physical challenges that made the production grueling. The emotional toll of spending months submerged in cold, dark spaces shouldn't be underestimated. Long hours spent floating in full gear between takes, staring into endless darkness, began to wear on even the toughest actors. To combat this, the production team introduced dry days, partial days during the week when no one would get in the water unless absolutely necessary. These became sacred, almost holy, breaks where the crew could feel the sun, dry their skin, and remember what it was like to walk without dragging 100 pounds of wet gear. Yet even on dry days, the ocean had its way. During a key location shoot in Thailand, a sudden squall rolled in from the sea, battering the production base camp with wind and rain. Tents snapped like matchsticks. Catering tables overturned. Camera equipment had to be hurriedly shielded with tarps and body-blocking crew members willing to stand shivering in the gale. When the storm finally passed, leaving devastation in its wake, there was a collective decision: shoot anyway. And so, the flooded set became an impromptu new backdrop, adding an eerie realism to scenes of post-disaster chaos. The camaraderie wasn't just reserved for the cast and crew. The local community where much of the outdoor filming took place became part of the production family. Fishermen lent their boats for chase scenes. Locals taught the crew tricks for navigating tricky reefs and avoiding dangerous currents. On weekends, there were massive beach cookouts, actors, divers, gaffers, and villagers sitting together under the stars, swapping stories and nursing bruises both physical and emotional. Post-production carried its own share of behind-the-scenes drama. The extensive visual effects work, blending practical animatronics with digital enhancements, became a race against time. At one point, an entire sequence set inside the geothermal vent system had to be rebuilt from scratch when original renderings failed to capture the choking, sulfurous dread the director envisioned. Artists worked around the clock, sleeping in shifts, until the final version emerged, a roiling hellscape of molten water and ancient stone that became one of the film's most jaw-dropping set pieces. When the film finally wrapped, after months of cold, chaos, and breathtaking artistry, the farewell party was less a celebration and more a survivor's reunion. There were gifts exchanged, small jars of water from the tank, inscribed with jokes and battle scars from the set. A battered mechanical shark fin, signed by the entire crew, became the unofficial trophy for the production's MVP. And the final toast, raised by a weary but beaming director, captured the heart of the whole experience. To the deep, to the madness, and to the crazy, beautiful fools who dared to dive. Because making a movie about surviving monsters isn't just about imagination. It's about surviving each other. About laughing in the face of exhaustion. About dragging yourself out of the water, bruised and breathless, and still wanting to dive back in. And somewhere, behind the shimmering fantasy that ended up on screen, there's the real story, a story of rainstorms and runaway sharks, of late-night sing-alongs and breathless underwater races, of a crew that fought through darkness and cold and chaos not because they had to, but because, deep down, they loved every brutal second of it. Because in the end, the true monsters weren't in the deep. They were the hurdles that tried to stop the story from being told. And like Jonas Taylor himself, the cast and crew faced them down, and won. In the first moments when the screen fades to the vast, endless blue of the ocean, a quiet truth settles over the audience. This is not just a story about monsters rising from the dark. It is a story about the darkness within ourselves, about greed, survival, and the eternal struggle to remember our place in a world that was never truly ours to rule. Beneath every thrashing fin, every glint of teeth, every desperate gasp for air, the film weaves a tapestry of themes and symbols so deep that they sometimes go unnoticed, like the creatures lurking just beyond the edge of the light. The most overwhelming theme, crashing through every frame like a relentless tide, is survival. But survival here isn't about heroism. It isn't pretty, and it isn't pure. It is primal, guttural, worn raw from the endless scraping of man against nature, nature against man. Jonas Taylor doesn't fight because he believes he will win. He fights because there is no other choice. Every bruise on his body, every broken bone, every scar he carries is a testament not to his strength, but to his refusal to yield. This idea of survival resonates through every character, from the scientists clutching at failing gear to the corporate agents scrambling to contain the very beasts they unleashed. Each of them is confronted with the same brutal choice: adapt or die. Those who cling to old assumptions, the belief in control, in mastery over nature, are swallowed whole. Those who bend, who break and bleed and crawl forward even when the future is nothing but darkness, are the ones who endure. It's a brutal lesson, but a necessary one. Tied tightly to survival is the theme of humility, or, more accurately, the devastating cost of its absence. Human beings, the film reminds us, are arrogant creatures. We build our glass and steel empires, we chart our oceans and our skies, and we convince ourselves that there is no mystery left beyond our grasp. But the trench, ancient, cold, and endless, laughs at that arrogance. It is a silent, patient monument to everything we do not know and cannot control. The creatures that rise from it are not evil. They are not villains. They are simply reminders. Brutal, bloody reminders that nature's dominance was never ceded to us. We merely convinced ourselves it was. The corporate forces in the film, represented by Driscoll and his cronies, symbolize this hubris in its purest, most poisonous form. Their blind greed, their refusal to heed the warnings etched in every sonar ping and every crumpled research station, serve as a mirror for humanity's real-world relationship with the unknown. They see the trench as a resource to be exploited, its creatures as assets to be controlled. In their downfall, swallowed, shredded, erased without ceremony, the film delivers its harshest condemnation. Those who seek to own the deep will be consumed by it. Yet not all human traits are portrayed as folly. Courage, resilience, sacrifice, these qualities shine in stark relief against the abyss. Jonas embodies a more humble bravery, not the kind that seeks glory, but the kind that accepts fear, accepts mortality, and fights anyway. In him, the film offers a counterpoint to arrogance. Survival is possible, the story suggests, but only when we approach the unknown with respect, caution, and the willingness to pay any price to protect others. This tension between hubris and humility is etched into the film's visual symbolism as well. The ocean itself is the ultimate symbol, a force so vast that it dwarfs all human endeavor. Wide shots that reduce ships to mere dots on a churning sea reinforce this idea again and again. You are small. You are vulnerable. The ocean does not care who you are. It has seen empires rise and fall and will see 1,000 more crumble into dust. The trench, with its crushing darkness and suffocating pressure, serves as a symbolic underworld, a place where characters are stripped down to their most primal selves. Descending into the trench is akin to descending into the unconscious, confronting buried fears and desires. It is no coincidence that the most critical turning points for the characters occur in the deepest, darkest places. It is there that true natures are revealed. It is there that the illusion of control is shattered. Monsters, too, carry heavy symbolic weight. The megalodon and its kin are not just physical threats. They are avatars of humanity's oldest fears. Fear of the dark. Fear of the unknown. Fear of forces too vast and ancient to be understood or bargained with. Their silent, relentless pursuit echoes the inescapability of nature's dominance. No matter how fast you run, no matter how deep you hide, the primal forces of the earth will always find you. Even the smaller creatures, the swarmers and the eel-like hunters, symbolize a different, quieter horror. That danger is not always grand or obvious. Sometimes it comes in small, insidious forms, creeping up in the spaces where you least expect it. These creatures strike not when characters are ready, but when they are tired, distracted, hopeful. They represent the constant gnawing threat that survival demands endless vigilance. Fire and water, traditionally opposing elements, are woven together in a potent symbolic dance throughout the story. The trench, ruled by crushing cold and darkness, is interrupted by eruptions of geothermal fire, a violent, chaotic force that both threatens and offers salvation. The final plan to destroy the megalodon relies on luring it into these vents, turning the Earth's own fury against the monsters that threaten humanity. But the use of fire is not presented as a triumph. It is shown as desperate, reckless, and dangerous. Fire is not the solution. It is simply another, more violent aspect of the natural world. Humanity survives not by conquering fire, but by surviving the damage it leaves behind. The characters' arcs mirror these elemental forces. Jonas, battered and burned, rises from the deep not as a victor, but as a survivor scarred by both water and fire. Jess, who starts the story believing in scientific enlightenment, finds herself wielding the primal tools of destruction. Mei, symbolizing the next generation, carries forward the hard-earned wisdom of both elements. The knowledge that survival is not about domination, but about coexistence with forces that cannot be tamed.